Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen. I'm a clinical psychologist who's been empowering disabled individuals, their families, and their support systems for over 20 years. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, where I curate tools, share mindsets, and promote habits to help the neurodiverse community thrive. Also, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. In this episode, I interview Dr. Eric Endlich, a college consultant. We explore what a college consultant is, when one is helpful, and the specific pressure points that they ease. Eric has a background as a licensed psychologist and a professional writer, and it's super cool to hear how his cumulative experiences have helped shape him as a college consultant today. Eric also has an expertise in supporting students with neurodiversities, learning differences, and emotional challenges. Please enjoy this interview with Eric. Hi, Eric. Welcome to the channel. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Gwen. Thanks for having me.
Well, maybe
I've got a cat on my lap, so don't be alarmed if you see a little fur in the frame.
I love it. I love it. Well, no one will ask if you're green screened to that. No, just kidding. Hey, so why don't we start with you telling us about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Eric Endlich, and I'm a clinical psychologist and an educational consultant or college admissions counselor. And my background is in clinical psychology, so I have a lot of years working with teens and adults. But what I do now is I help work with students who are transitioning to college or in some cases grad school, and I help them with the college selection process, coming up with college list, working on the essays, the applications, staying on track, getting everything in, helping them understand the whole process, which can be rather daunting. And I particularly like working with students who have various challenges, whether it's ADHD, anxiety, autism, dyslexia, and so on.
That's awesome. That's so great because I do think that I think it can be a little bit of a hidden process in the sense that a lot of students know, okay, I'm going to go to college after high school. But I don't really know all the steps that it entails, all the way from college selection and what that entails to writing your essays and all of those things that you identified. When do you think a college consultant, especially as you work with neurodiversities or students that have neurodiversities, when do you think it's critical or helpful to work with a college consultant?
Yeah, so if the student or parents are feeling overwhelmed by the process, I work with a fair number of families where the parents didn't go to college in this country or didn't grow up in this country and aren't familiar with the process and find it rather daunting, or just parents who are working full time and don't really have the time and energy to take on this other huge project. Sure, anyone can do their own research about colleges, but I've spent thousands of hours traveling the country to tour different schools and learn about different schools and education news, and it would be a lot of time for families to sort of put in the same time and take that project on. So obviously, lots of people go through it without a consultant, but if you're feeling overwhelmed and you want to share the burden with someone, then we're here. And for students with particular challenges, again, like autism or ADHD, sometimes families don't know and don't always feel like they're getting the guidance on how to get the supports and accommodations they need in college. How is college going to be different? Can college provide the services that my child needs? College is really different in terms of what kinds of supports they provide to students with, whether it's emotional challenges like addictions, eating disorders, depression, or learning differences, ADHD, autism, and so on.
Yeah, I often on this channel with other guests, we often talk about it like kind of falling off a cliff, because you can come from these really beautifully supported high school years where you've got lots of support, maybe 20, 30 accommodations. I mean, that's not unusual for some IEPs. And then you get to the collegiate setting, and we know that there really aren't a lot of accommodations that are offered one, and two, because I've in my experience, I see that they can oftentimes be dependent upon the professor or the teacher that's teaching that class and how accessible those accommodations are. Not saying that a student who's awarded them or is able to have them won't get them, but that it's different. The navigation process is different with every professor. So I can imagine that to be very helpful. Eric, as you look at supporting students in this big transition, I mean, this is a transition to adulthood. And I think for so many teenagers, it's really their first experience sometimes away from home, getting the experience of not having the full support of their family. I mean, full time, 24/7. You know, when you're helping a student decide even what kind of colleges are going to be best for you, what is your process? Like, how do you approach that?
So a key really is getting to know the student. And, before I ever start working with a family or sign a contract, I meet with the parents, I meet with the student. I want to just make sure it's a good fit, of course, that they're going to be comfortable working with me. And then I start meeting with them. I have them fill out questionnaires that ask about things like, how far away they're willing to go for college, what size college they think they might want, what they think they might want to study, if they're looking for any special clubs or services or sports or other features of a college campus. Of course, some students don't know that. They haven't thought about it. I'm not sure what size college I want to go to. I'm not sure what I want to major in. That's totally fine. But, I'll ask that of parents and have a different questionnaire for students. So I'm starting to collect that information. Then students who are on an IEP or 504, I ask to see that education plan. If they've had neuropsych testing, I look at that too. So, and then with the signed release, I'll speak to folks at school. I just spoke to a high school counselor today at someone's school. So I'll speak to the counselor. I'll speak to a special ed teacher, potentially an individual therapist or counselor, and then kind of do a triangulation with all those data points to really get a good picture of what's going to be a good environment for this student. And then after that, it's an ongoing sort of dialogue and process where I might say, here's a couple of colleges that seem like they meet most of your criteria. Why don't you take a look at them? And that could mean, prior to the pandemic, could be getting in the car and going out and doing an actual tour. It might be a virtual tour. It might just be, doing some research on a website. And then I get feedback from the student. They say, oh, I really like that. I really like the fact that they have this program or this feature. And then I kind of take that into account as I continue to build the list. Or if they say, well, I went there and, it was just too small for me. I don't think it's really what I'm looking for. Well, now we know you're looking for larger campuses. Mm-hmm. So we figure this out as a team over time, what's the best fit. And, if they find a college that they fall in love with, great. We look for other colleges that are similar to that. You don't want to get too attached to one specific college. And then over time, we have a list. It's also important that the list be balanced. Sometimes students are really focused on getting into the most selective schools, the most competitive schools. That's fine if they want to apply to some of them, but they also need to have schools on their list that they can be pretty confident of getting into so they don't end up empty-handed. So I work carefully with them, looking at their transcripts and their test scores to make that balance so that they can feel confident that they'll get a number of offers. And, sometimes I have students who are getting in every place they apply. That's great, but you can't take that for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, when do you think this process should start? At what age or what year in school should you be thinking about this?
Well, junior year is kind of the sweet spot. It's a really good time, early in junior year if possible. I have had students start in senior year. I've had students start, well into the senior year, kind of late in the game. So you can start at any point. And essentially, it's never really too late to apply to college, despite what people might tell you, like, oh, it's past the season. Junior year, early junior year is a really good time. Sophomore year is fine. If I do get families who start with me sophomore year, and the nice thing about that is we can sort of ramp up slowly. We're just kind of talking about, hey, how are you going to spend your summer vacation, and what might you do, outside of school to further the interests that you have, whether it's drama or coding or engineering, so I'm helping them kind of build stuff outside of school and outside of the college process too in sophomore year. And then by junior year, then we can start to get into really looking at colleges. So sophomore or junior year, preferably not later than junior year, if possible.
Yeah. And I just even see the need to be thinking about transition earlier. And so because my clients have a neurodiversity of some kind or maybe several, I always recommend that at minimum we start at 15, because I want to get a nice inventory of like adult skills, to see if they have the skills to support themselves, really, I think emotionally and from an executive functioning standpoint outside of the home. And I understand that obviously those things aren't going to be fully developed, but at least we're attending to those. And so I encourage my families to really think about that on their 15th birthday, and then every birthday thereafter, filling out some inventories that I have, so that we can just have a more formalized process, so it doesn't kind of sneak up on you. And I think for some of my clients that where a four-year university or college may not be the first move out of high school, sometimes families wait a little bit too late because they're navigating so much already anyway.
Yeah.
And we get to senior year and we're in senior year and it's like, oh, we should probably think about that, when really we needed to think about that earlier.
Yeah. One of the things I speak and write about quite a bit is college readiness. There's a lot of skills that go into being ready for college. It's not just about whether you can academically get accepted to or compete in college. There's many other components of being ready to thrive in college. And if a student doesn't have those skills, and students with various learning differences typically need to work on more skills than other students, if they don't have those skills yet, then the earlier in college we identify that, the more time they have in high school, the more time they have in high school to work on them before college. So, if someone came to me in senior year and we identified, oh, there's all these, you don't know how to do laundry, you don't know how to cook, you've never lived away from home, you don't know how to, manage money. If there's all these skills they have to work on, you're not going to be able to sort of learn all that at the last minute. They're better off sort of taking a gap year, certainly getting a lot of support in college. But if parents come to me earlier on in high school, then I can be coaching them on, oh, your child's never gotten themselves up in the morning. Well, let's figure out how you can start sort of backing off so they can start getting up and getting ready for school without your intervention, because they're going to have to do that in college.
Yep. That's awesome that you can kind of reverse engineer, if you will, the outcome by supporting the family in these really maybe attentional shifts or behavioral changes, just to start. And this is another thing that I see, especially in IEPs, where, if we have had an aid or a lot of accommodations, what we didn't really think about was, what are those accommodations or that aid? What skills are they replacing for that student? And have we done a good job in transferring and empowering that student with skills so they can take that responsibility back, so that they can take those skills with them to the next step, whatever that is. And so I love that you have this support, especially if you can meet with a family in their in the student's sophomore year. Eric, do you feel like this is a loaded question, but it's interesting. Do you feel like your clinical psych background plays a role in this role of college counseling?
No, it's an excellent question. Well, all of my background plays a role. So I'm also a special needs parent myself. So I've been through the IEP system. I've been through that cliff that you talk about at 22, where the school district is completely out of the picture. And for some students when they get their high school diploma, the school system's out of the picture. So So I have that perspective as a parent, knowing, and also knowing the challenges of building independence in your child, and knowing that
Yes.
that temptation as a special needs parent to be sort of very protective of your child because they might be more vulnerable. So I get all of that. As a psychologist, I feel like it's helpful in a whole bunch of ways. One, of course, is, when I get the neuropsych report, I can read it and understand it.
Yeah. Yes.
If I'm talking to a school counselor or a private therapist, I feel like we're sort of speaking the same language. And there's a lot of psychology in forming a bond with a teen. I work with a variety of teens of different academic levels, different backgrounds, and I connect well with the vast majority of them. And I think some of that is just years of having a varied caseload as a psychologist. Mm-hmm. The other piece where it comes into play kind of surprisingly is in writing the essays. I also happen to be a professional writer and editor, so that's helpful. And I was an English major way back in college. But when I'm working with students on essays, it's very anxiety provoking. And a lot of what I feel like I'm bringing to the table as a consultant for families is lowering the temperature, lowering the anxiety level. This is a very tense process. There's finances involved. There's moving away from home involved. There's potentially, prestige and status. There's all these factors. And when it comes to writing the essays, students very often get anxious because the essay prompts for college are very different from the kinds of essays they have to write in high school. If you have to write an essay in high school about a current event or the Civil War or whatever it might be, you can go on the internet and start looking stuff up and get all kinds of material for your essay. But if the prompt is to ask you to introspect and talk about a personal challenge that you've overcome, for example, where do you look that up? You have to look inside. So students can kind of get freaked out about these essays sometimes. And I, again, kind of help lower the temperature and just get into a dialogue with them. We're just chatting. And, as we go through these conversations, stuff just comes up. Oh, really? You never told me about that before. What do you think about writing about that? Tell me more about that. And together we kind of sometimes stumble across or develop these ideas that they could write about, and I'm helping kind of bring out their voice. I'm not doing any of the writing, of course. It's got to sound like a 17-year-old or whatever their age is, but I'm helping kind of bring out their best selves.
Yeah, and the introspection piece is so important because as a young person, as a teenager, introspection isn't necessarily something that teens are known to do. Right? It's not necessarily developmentally happening for many. Not saying, we have some very old soul kind of teenagers that do this already. But I find that, a formal process, maybe even asking the right questions, really does promote introspection in a way that's digestible or palatable for a teenager. And I see that even in the work, in my work, when I'm really trying to figure out what the next steps are. And many of my clients don't go to college. But the questions are still the same, and what I'm interested in it's similar, right? What makes you tick? What's hard for you? How do you learn the best? What do you see yourself doing? How do you feel productive? What makes you happy? All of these things that most of my teens that are going to college that I'm working with, when I ask them questions like this, I see the deer in the headlights.
Yes, exactly.
Huh?
I see that too.
Yeah. And I love how you said, essays you can get online and you can find lots of information, about facts and all day long. But looking at yourself, maybe even developing your own self-knowledge, that's part of this process. And how do you help that come to light? I can totally see how being a clinical psych really brings that. Plus decoding neuropsych assessments.
Yeah.
And
it's not just for the, I mentioned the essays, but there's also the college interviews. So some colleges don't offer interviews, but sometimes they do. And sometimes a student gets an email after they've applied to a college. And And it says, we'd like to schedule an interview with them, which is great news, and they should be happy. But of course, they get anxious, and they, send me a text or an email, and they say, what's this? What are they going to ask me? What should I do to prepare? Again, like, hard to sort of look up the answers, but we'll do a mock interview, and I will ask them some of the common questions that they're likely to be asked. And they may say to me, I don't know what to say to that. That's fine, because we're just practicing, so it doesn't matter. And we can brainstorm together. Well, if they do ask you about a strength, what are some things you might talk about? If they do ask you for an example of such and such, what might you come up with? And by doing this brainstorming in advance, then when they have the real interview, they're going to feel a little more comfortable with the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like an inoculation.
Yeah.
It's an experiential exposure that gives them something to hang on to in the practice that's, graduated to the actual event. So that's so lovely. I love this idea of reducing the temperature. Let's just bring down the temperature, whether that's for the student and or for the parents and the family. This idea of, when I'm overwhelmed by a process, which applying for college is overwhelming, can be overwhelming, what do you do? And, seeking the guidance of an expert is something that is very helpful, as well as breaking things down into small, manageable parts and chunks that, and an expert knows how to do that. The first steps to take, to get to some of the answers, and by doing that education and that experience becomes the education for that student and that family to make those decisions even clearer, I think, for them.
Yeah, and Eric, I live and breathe this stuff. I love it. I love going to colleges. I love reading about them. I love learning about what's new every single day, the education news. And, I'm not allergic to it. It doesn't create a reaction in me the way it might with some people. And I've noticed in the pandemic, this has just been heightened. Why? Because there's so much uncertainty, and uncertainty drives anxiety. What's going to happen next year? Is this college still going to be test optional? Are they going to be having classes in person? With all of these people deferring, is there going to be more competition next year? There's all these things that raise the anxiety or the temperature even more than usual. And I'm here to kind of inject a voice of reason and bring that down and reassure them that they're going to be fine. They're going to get into college. They're going to have a great experience. And we don't have to be, prematurely attached to one specific college, because there's going to be a lot of good options for just about any student.
Yeah, and maybe what you're doing is you're also offering information that people that don't do this, right, that but they don't. So, knowing the particular dynamics or personality of a college campus, or that particular college itself, each college has their own kind of identity and personality. And so what does that look like? You're also helping them, asking questions that and offering information that they may not have even thought of before, which can be really helpful. Eric, you had mentioned earlier that thinking about a gap year, for some people, they might not know what that is. Can you just tell us what a gap year is? Let's start there. What's a gap year?
Yeah. So generally that refers to a year between high school and college. So instead of graduating high school in the spring and starting college that same fall of the same calendar year, it means taking another whole school year, another whole calendar year, essentially, to do something else. And that something else could be just about anything. It could be getting a job, which could build all kinds of great skills for adulthood and improve college readiness. You have to be on time for a job, just like you have to be on time for class, and you have to deal with all different personalities sometimes if you're, say, in a retail environment, which is good for dealing with a bunch of new folks in college. Or there's lots of gap year programs. So, there's programs that involve travel all over the world, involve learning foreign languages, involve community service in this country or other countries. So lots of different things, or someone might have a specific interest that they pursue during that gap year. So many different ways you can use that year. And as I mentioned before, there are college readiness programs. So there are programs kind of designed for students who really aren't ready for college to kind of help to move them to the next step. And that may be helping them with social skills, with independent living skills, with academic skills. A lot of the students I work with struggle with executive functioning, meaning that they struggle to organize themselves and to manage their time, to keep track of all their assignments, to get all the assignments in on time, to actually bring them to school, and all the other steps involved. So some of these support programs in colleges and some of the pre-college programs or college readiness programs help with those areas too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Eric, can you help families navigate or find programs for that gap
Sure.
year?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So part of what I'm doing is upfront assessing, is your child going to be ready to go straight to college, or would they be better off taking a gap year? And I see quite a few students who would be better off taking a gap year. So we're talking about that hopefully early on. Students can still go through that same college application process in senior year of high school. So just, alongside their classmates in senior year of high school, they can be applying to college, getting their letters of acceptance, but then they can defer for a year, and that's a decision that we'd have together with the family, and they may accept the offer, but choose to defer, meaning say, yes, thank you for offering me this, chance to come to your college. I accept. I'd like to take a gap year and come the year later. And usually you'd want to offer to the college what your plan is going to be for that year, not just say, hey, I'm going to just sit at home and play video games, but actually have some sort of plan. I'm going to get a job, or I'm going to travel the world, or I'm going to enroll in this program that I think is going to give me some useful skills.
Right. To ultimately increase the success, right, in that placement. And I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so gap years and gap year programs have been around long enough that they've been collecting data, and there's enough data to suggest that students have higher GPAs when they take gap years. They have better rates of graduation, that the outcomes overall tend to be better for students who've taken gap years. So much so that a number of colleges, not a huge number, but a handful of colleges, are encouraging their students to take gap years, sometimes offering scholarships to help support students during that gap year. So colleges, a lot of colleges are on board with this idea. You might think they would want the students to come in right away so they can get their tuition money, but colleges see that students have good outcomes, that they thrive in college, and they also, one more year, one more chronological year in a child's life means another year of brain development.
Yes.
And as well as I do, that the brain continues to develop well into our 20s, the frontal lobe especially, that's involved in planning, organizing, judgment, thinking about the future, making good decisions. So a student who comes into college a year older is going to be a little more mature, a little bit more able to make good decisions, to probably be better organized and able to manage themselves. And as I said before, there's all these college readiness skills, whether it's managing money, managing your emotions, managing your interactions with your peers, that another year out there in the world, whether it's in a gap year program or traveling the world or working at a job, they're going to have more skills coming into college with that additional year.
Yeah, and I do think we take for granted that the brain isn't fully developed. It isn't fully matured yet, and that the skills that we expect college students to be able to do really are, I think, tethered by executive functioning. And so when our frontal lobes aren't even fully developed yet, it's really hard for some to expect that. And then add a learning difference or add, a neurodiversity to that. And, we know research shows that can be up to a 3-year delay. And so sometimes for some parents, just thinking about this decision about whether you take a gap year or not, the idea of, even though your child is 18, are they functioning independently more like a 15-year-old? And would you drop a 15-year-old off at college? Like what would that look like, you know? And it's, you know, I feel like these conversations, especially when we work with teens and adults, become very real. It's all about where the rubber meets the road. It's all about practicality. And it's no more, it can't be theoretical any longer. Not that I feel like we're theoretical with kids, but I think for younger children and early intervention, we know we're going to school. We know we've got these kind of therapies on board. We know that there's a linear progression to that. And, you know, after high school, there's just not a linear progression. And so, you know, where do you go and how do you navigate that time? That is really a fun, rich, and overwhelming time.
It's a voyage of discovery. There's more options than ever, and there's more uncertainty than ever. The world is just changing so quickly. The careers, the jobs that are going to be available to these students 5-6 years from now. You know, if you're in high school, you're talking about being out in the workplace maybe 5 years from now. Maybe it's closer to 10 years from now if you're going to grad school also. Do we know what the job market's going to look like? There is so much changing in the technologies and the job descriptions that are going to be out there. So it's important to set yourself up for success. And that means, you know, learning skills that are going to be agile and flexible, because you can't train for a specific job that doesn't even exist yet. But you can build skills like communication skills, ability to work as a team, ability to solve problems that are going to be applicable to a lot of different jobs.
Yeah. And isn't it so funny? We've spent a lot of our time when we talk about, and when you've talked about college readiness and thriving in college, we've really not spoken a lot about academics. We've spoken a lot about the other types of skills, social emotional skills, executive functioning skills, this idea of, I love this, agility and flexibility, adaptability, resilience, right? Planning and production, like all of these things that are not connected to academia. And so how important those skills are, apart from just grades, right? And how well we did in school. Eric, do you also, and can you help families with the financial, not pay for college, but the financial piece of applications and what kind of grants or loans? I mean, that world, do you help with that as well?
Yeah, so that's a big part of the conversation. Of course, that may not be foremost in the students' minds, but it's certainly, you know, at top of mind for many parents. Because most parents have certain constraints and they can only pay so much per college, which is, unfortunately, there's often a gap between what they can afford and what college typically costs. So I ask families up front, and, you know, I've just been, you know, chatting with some families this week about this very topic, because it's really important for me to understand what are your financial constraints. And some people are, you know, not totally comfortable or don't often have these conversations, but they're really important. You know, if you can only afford, say, $20,000-$30,000 a year for college, I need to know that, so we're not looking at $60,000-$70,000 a year situations. But one of the benefits that a consultant like me brings to the table, which far outweighs the cost of my services, is my knowledge of the landscape of scholarships, so that we can target schools where students are going to do well financially, not just sort of get in academically or all the other factors that we talked about, but, you know, which colleges provide the most aid. And there's two kinds of aid. And, you know, some of what I'm doing with families is educating them. If they know this stuff, that's great, but not all families do. That there is financial aid that is completely dependent on your financial need, your finances, your you know, income and your assets. And then there's a completely different pot of money, a set of type of scholarships, which is called merit aid. And then that has to do more with things like grades, test scores, extracurricular activities, leadership ability, and so on. It might be measured by essays and interviews and other aspects of a student's application. So there's these two separate pots of money. Some students are more qualified to get one. Some might have access to both, which would be even better. And I have students who, both have high financial need, so they're getting generous aid based on their financial situation. And if they also have really good grades, they can get merit aid and come out even better. And then, of course, there's additional scholarships out there that people can apply for that may be amazing if they're really strong students. So I will not only kind of help them find the colleges where they're likely to do well, but help direct them in a scholarship search for other possible sources of aid. And families are often, I see this online and social media, where can my student, get great scholarships, and where do you find these opportunities? And there are websites that people sometimes go to, but they're not really personalized. When you're interacting with the website, they don't really know you, and they may not understand that you're probably not going to get that scholarship for one reason or another.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, this is a big part of college, and so it's great that you have this information and this education, because it really is a process that needs information for people to understand. I love that you're having, you just said, sometimes we have these conversations that parents have not had before. And I experienced that as well. When we're really starting to think about really clearly what are the next steps. And it does bring in so many questions that I think a lot of parents and families aren't really asking themselves directly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's great you're having these conversations about the student, who they are, what this family can afford, and what that looks like, the trajectory of that. How about the DSPS process, or the disability services process for students that need accommodations, Eric? How do you help in that regard?
Good question. Again, something that I write about too. So there's lots of links on my website to information on these topics. So one thing is that it's important to sort of separate out accommodations from supports. All colleges can provide accommodations. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, students are entitled to accommodations if they have disabilities and if those accommodations are reasonable. And they can get documentation, typically in the form of a neuropsych evaluation, not always, but typically that would then document, this student needs extra time on tests, this student needs testing in a distraction-reduced environment, and so on. Again, those accommodations, in theory, should be available at any college. Some students also need supports. That's not going to be enough. They also need academic coaching or executive function coaching to help them get their assignments done every week, because they've been relying on that in high school, and they're not at the point yet where they can just go off and keep track of hundreds of pages of reading and writing every semester. Mm-hmm. Maybe not hundreds of pages of writing, but dozens of pages of writing. So if they need those supports too, then I'm helping kind of educate them on, you can't get that at every college, but here's some colleges where you can get it. For the accommodations, then I kind of just help coach them through the process of what they need to think about. For example, one question that comes up is, do I talk about my disability when I'm applying to college? Do I write about it in my essay? Do I mention it somewhere? Is it going to help me? Is it going to hurt me? So we talk about that. And most importantly, I encourage families to do the research about the disability services at college when they're looking at and selecting colleges for their list, not after they've gotten admitted and put down a deposit and committed to a college. That's not the time to discover that there's only one person working in this disability office serving, 15,000 students. You want to do that research up front when you're looking at colleges, because if that's really important, you may decide, I really think the disability services at this college are way better than the services at this other college, so I'm going to really try hard to get into this college. So it's important to kind of think about those things early on. And I think, unfortunately, it comes up late in the game for some people. They're so focused on getting in that they're not thinking about what comes after. And also they need to be, getting this done in advance so that when the student starts their first day of classes in college, everything's in place. That's not the time to go to disability services, because if you start too late, you may be setting up disabilities when you've already got, your first midterms, and then you may not have the accommodations you need. If you've gotten that all worked out before you even start college, you can relax and you can start your classes knowing that you've got the note taker, you've got the extra time on tests, you've got everything you need, you've spoken with your professors and so on.
Yeah.
And that's just good planning and knowing that you need to do this stuff in advance.
Yeah, and that goes back to knowing yourself. Back to how do you learn the best, and what are the necessary kind of elements or factors that you need in order to learn or to perform or to produce. This is so important. And so some of those early questions, sometimes what I see for some of my clients is they didn't really use some of their accommodations that were given through their IEP or identified through their IEP. They were able to just kind of work really, really hard and not use them. And then what they don't anticipate is the very big jump of workload and pace that happens in a collegiate setting. And so they don't even think to apply for those accommodations because they didn't use them in high school. And someone to really help them understand, these are the conditions of college. Do you think under those conditions that you would need an accommodation at that point so that you aren't faced with, oh my goodness, I have to now apply the quarter, the semester's already started, and I won't have the accommodations I need for that upcoming midterm test, quiz, whatever that is. Yeah. There is a big jump in load and pace. And so I just think that that's hard because they've never experienced it before.
And as you said, educating students about that jump is important because I do see students who say, I'm getting these accommodations in high school, but I don't think I'm going to need them in college. I think I'll be okay in college. Or, I don't really use this very often in high school, but they're not factoring in, you're going to have much more independence in college. You're not going to have your parents reminding you to get your homework done and so on and so forth. So you might actually need them more in college than you're using them now. And you know what? My philosophy is set up as much as you can in terms of supports and accommodations. If you don't need them, that's fine. If you need them for only the first semester, the first year, and you want to jettison them later, great. And lots of these support programs work that way. Some of them say, a lot of our students only use them for the first year. Some students use them for 4 years. But you don't want to decide that after the fact. I think sometimes students think, well, I think I'll be okay. Let's see how it goes. Well, if you're not okay and you're halfway through the first semester and you're falling behind in all your classes and you're having trouble understanding and you haven't talked to the professor and you don't have accommodations, then it's going to be really hard to catch up. It's going to be really hard to rush around and get the accommodations, line up the tutors, deal with whatever feelings you might have at that point of stress. Whereas if you have all that stuff lined up and it turns out you over-prepared and you don't need all of those resources or accommodations, that's fine. So you don't use them. So you start to let go of some of them or just keep them in your back pocket in case you need them later. But you don't want to be trying to line all that stuff up when you're starting to fail your classes or fall behind in your schoolwork.
Yeah. And so someone like you, I think, adds a real thoughtfulness to the process because you can be thoughtful about the steps and the factors that need to be considered for setting you up for success or setting a student up for success, right? And you know what kind of questions to ask, which is great because some people don't think about accommodations or look at an IEP, even if it's a student that's not using any part of their IEP. That how important that is. Eric, oh my gosh, this is so helpful. Even for me, I'm like, this is really good. This is really good for me even.
I'm just going to get some more light. I think it's getting dark in here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So Eric, I feel we've been touching upon this throughout, but I think, I love to ask this question in all of my interviews, no matter who the expert is. And that is, if you could only choose one skill to empower in a student that you're working with, what would it be and why?
Mm-hmm. Well, Gwen, I think you've already said it yourself, but I'm gonna circle back to it. So as I mentioned, there's all these skills involved in college readiness, and I've written some articles on it. I break it down into three main areas: self-awareness, knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, knowing what things you struggle with; self-advocacy, being able to speak up and go out there and get the things you need and advocate for yourself. Pursue the resources that you might need to deal with the things that you're struggling with. And then self-management, which is being able to manage your time, your money, your feelings, your reactions. But if I had to pick one, it would be self-awareness, which is the one that you've talked about. Because if you know yourself, if you know what you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
then you know enough to address those things. If you know about yourself, I tend to be vulnerable to depression. And when the stress gets high, I might start withdrawing socially. If you know that I struggle with time management and I tend to put off my assignments till the last minute, or I'm not very good with social skills and it's going to be hard for me to make friends. If you know those things about yourself, then you can take the appropriate steps. You can join clubs to have a better chance of making friends. You can line up executive function coaching so that your time management, you've got a professional working with you to make sure you do as well as possible. If the issue is depression, obviously, maybe you're meeting with a counselor at school, or you're monitoring yourself so that if you find that you're skipping meals and you're sleeping late and you're skipping classes, that you can sort of recognize that and say, you know what, I think I might be getting depressed again. I better go to the counseling center and meet with somebody.
Yep.
So if you know yourself, then you're more likely to take those steps. If you're either not aware or you're in denial and you're like, I'm great, I'm going to be fine, I don't have any problems, then you're going to be more likely to stumble over those things and have them kind of come back and bite you.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That back to that self-knowledge, and when you have that knowledge, what you're empowered to do something with it, hopefully, and that getting help and support at any age, at any time is okay. There's nothing wrong. Everyone needs support, and I think it brings up that idea of, interdependence. We are interdependent. If some of my clients feel like the word independent means that they're alone and isolated, and it's like, no. Like, that's not what we mean by that. But this idea of interdependence, and how we learn about ourselves. But yeah, really highlighting those social, emotional learning kinds of skills, starting with self-awareness. Awesome. Eric, if anyone's listening to this or watching this and they go, I need to reach out to Eric, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? I know you've also, and I mean, you've written so much, so that, just if you could share all of the ways that people can access you.
Sure. Well, you can go to my website, topcollegeconsultants.com. That's Top College Consultants. You can email me at Eric, ERIC, at topcollegeconsultants.com. So that's Eric at topcollegeconsultants.com, ERIC. You can call me toll free, 877-WE-APPLY. But email's usually the best way, because I'll hold on to emails and get back to people. And it's a good way for people to sort of give me a little information if they want. I have a junior, we live in this area, and so on. And by the way, I work with students all over, so location is no object.
Awesome. That's so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today, Eric. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure talking to you, Gwen.
Thanks for watching. If you're interested in finding out more about Eric, his information is in the description below. I've also provided a link to my website where I provide additional insights and impressions of this interview. If you got any value from this interview, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Doing so helps to get this information to others just like you. And if there's a topic or program that you want to know more about, share it in the comments below. See you in the next video, and thanks for watching.